When it comes to politics, there seems to be a lot happening in the law and order space at the moment. And will these changes in laws, changes in legislation result in improved law and order, improved public safety for us here in New Zealand? Well, that remains to be seen. But joining us on the program now, political commentator based at Victoria University in Wellington, Dr. Bryce Edwards. Kia ora, good morning.
Maureen, Andrew.
Before we jump into the law and order topic, because that seems to be what the government is particularly busy with at the moment, interested to get your views on some leadership issues. Chris Hipkins, will he make Christmas, do you think?
Oh, wow. That's the big question for the opposition at the moment. This latest poll that came out a few days ago had him down as preferred Prime Minister, I think dropping from about 18 or 19% support down to 12 and a half. So, this is not good timing because he's been showing a bit more, he's been getting out in the public a lot more recently. Yep. So it's never good when your poll ratings go down when you're more visible. Yep. So Labor's got some big decisions to make. And there's no one that people are really gravitating around in Labor. Hipkins apparently is determined to stay. Yep. Like he's just adamant. He thinks he's got a chance of being.
And polls are one thing, I suppose, but whether he's got the popular support in his caucus is the other. That there is no heir apparent in amongst the remnant of what was the Labour Party government is perhaps good news for him, perhaps?
Oh, absolutely. He's still a very competent former Prime Minister, former Minister. He's solid. He might not be spectacular. But yeah, there's no one else from that era that is more senior than him, really.
And I understand, seeing if he can pick up a few tricks from the UK Labour government, a little bit of an overseas holiday, saying, hey, what's your secret?
Yes, well, he's gone over to the UK and he's meeting with the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and he says he's going to pick up on what Labour's done to be successful there. But, of course, it's worth remembering that even though Labour in Britain have won the election, they did it in a first-past-the-post situation, and it was more due to the collapse of the Conservative government than Starmer and Labour. He's already quite an unpopular Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. His net approval ratings are negative 16 at the moment. So he's having no honeymoon. He seems to be already in the sort of same area as Boris Johnson and some of those other unpopular prime ministers.
It seems like Chris Hipkins might be able to give him tips on. I mean, even Chris Hipkins hasn't got numbers like that, although, to be fair, he's not Prime Minister. I suppose the other aspect in UK politics is, since the Labour government has come in, huge law and order issues. Wanting to look tough on crime here in New Zealand, and a whole range of legislation being pushed through at the moment, and quite a bit of pushback from people in the justice sector.
Yeah, I mean, law and order has come back up as a big issue for the public in the last few years, and that's obviously to do with increasing crime rates. Crime has been going up in certain areas, especially violent crime, and so we're seeing in opinion polls that it tends to be the third or fourth biggest issue for most voters after things like the economy and health. So, and Labour was seen as weak on this in government by a lot of voters. National, really pushed law and order to get elected last year, along with New Zealand First especially. And so, and they're seen by voters as being more competent on justice issues. So, they've promised some things. Now they're having to deliver. Mark Mitchell, as the Minister of Police, is particularly hardline. I'm not sure about their Justice Minister, Paul Goldsmith, if he's so hardline on these things, but certainly National, having to deliver on this. They're already in difficult territory because they've promised to reduce the metrics of I think what their target is to get the number of victims of violent crime down, but it's already gone up this year, which isn't necessarily their fault, but it means signs that, things are going in the wrong direction to what they've promised.
There is more arrests. There are more people being charged for not just violent offences, but burglary and theft as well. Concerns about whether we've got the capacity within our prison system to cope with getting tough on crime.
Yeah, that's a big debate at the moment. And yeah, like you say, some officials are pushing back on some of the policies of the government that might lead to greater incarceration. So New Zealand First in particular has have a policy of not letting the justice system allow convicted, sentenced criminals to serve as much of their concurrent, is that the word? The concurrent sentences. So they don't want some of these sentences for different crimes being served at the same time. Mm-hmm. They want them after each other more often. But the Ministry of Justice is saying, well, hey, that might be fine, but we don't actually have the capacity. That would double the prison population. And we just don't have those beds. And it's very expensive. You know, the figure put on a prisoner being in jail for a year is $120,000.
Wow.
So, not cheap. So yeah, there's lots of debates around those areas at the moment. And then of course there's the gang patches too.
Exactly.
Andrew.
Yeah, no, and this is a big part of it, getting tough on gangs, and there have been some clampdowns recently. But an interesting interpretation of legislation here to say that somebody can be convicted not only for wearing a gang patch publicly, but also for having one in their house, even if it's not theirs.
Yes, so the government, well, already we have laws around the wearing of gang patches. Yep. So I think it was Labor, or at least Labor have agreed with this policy of banning patches in government buildings and hospitals and so forth. Mm-hmm. National is now extending that out to all public areas. Yep. And so that's the legislation that's going through Parliament at the moment, with some other quite hardline rules against gangs congregating in public. But there's been this new change that Mark Mitchell has pushed through that mean if gang members keep on breaking the rules on gang patches in public, the police can then search their homes for the possession of those patches. So it's a very unusual rule, but it's not quite as simple that you just can't have them in your house. It's only if within a space of 5 years, I think it is, if a gang member breaches that law of wearing the insignia in public, whether they do it 3 times, they therefore give the police the permission, if you like, to search their house for patches.
It does seem to be slightly shaky, though, to go into somebody's house and, yes, take their drugs, take their firearms, but to take clothing that may be the possession of somebody else, it seems a little bit murky, but I suppose we'll see how that unfolds as it is applied by the police and the courts.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of opposition to this, I think from some justice advocates, from civil liberties proponents, the opposition parties. They say this is a step too far. And yeah, it is quite extraordinary. It's modelled on some legislation in Western Australia. Okay. But it certainly is quite authoritarian, draconian. But I think it will have a lot of public support. I think the public do feel that gangs are out of control and that the police do need any additional weapons, if you like, to be able to combat them.
Now, there are quite a few controversial issues that the government is wrestling with at the moment. A lot of things hitting headlines in media, but it seems that our Prime Minister is, well, not necessarily missing in action, but at least not necessarily front-footing it when it comes to talking with media about some of these more controversial issues. As the leader of the country, any excuses there, do you think?
Oh, look, all prime ministers try and pick and choose how they portrayed in the public and what media outlets they go on.
Yeah.
So at the moment, TVNZ's Q&A, that's kind of the flagship, current affairs, politics show.
Last one standing, I think, is
yeah. No, it's an important show.
Yeah.
And Jack Tame, the front person for that, came out on the weekend and said, "Hey, Christopher Luxon, we still want you on the show. We've put in lots of requests. You keep turning them down. We haven't had you on the show for a year. What gives?" And trying to sort of shame him into agreeing to come on the show. And that does highlight that question of to what extent politicians should be allowed to say no to Radio Rhema, say no to News Talk ZB.
Yep.
And of course, for quite a while, the last Prime Minister, or at least Jacinda Ardern, decided not to go on the Mike Hosking show on News Talk ZB,
Yep.
and she got criticised for that. And yes, I think Luxon now is getting criticised, but I think he said this morning that he is going to go on the show later this year now.
Yeah, well, the shame tactics seem to have worked for Jack Tame in that regard. Bryce, always appreciate your insights and your wisdom. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.